The small lakeside town of Brooksville awoke that Saturday morning to a kind of perfection that seemed designed for weddings. The air was clear and warm. Sunlight filtered gently through the clouds, and the calm breeze carried the scent of blooming gardenias from the nearby park. At St. Luke's Chapel, a quiet excitement filled the air as preparations were underway for the marriage of 26-year-old Alia Tan, a Malaysian woman with striking poise, and 59-year-old Robert Hayes, a respected Canadian accountant who had made Brooksville his home after his wife's death several years earlier. Alia had not exactly earned affection from locals during her short time in town. People described her as beautiful but distant, someone who appeared more interested in opportunity than community. Those who knew her past whispered that she had a pattern of brief romances, often with older men who could offer comfort and stability. She always knew what she wanted, remarked Elaine Foster, who once employed Alia at her cafe. And it was never someone struggling to pay bills. Robert, in contrast, was admired for his patience and generosity. Having lost his wife, Margaret, in a tragic accident 3 years before, he had thrown himself into work and faith. He lived quietly in a well-kept 2-story home on Birchwood Lane, managing a small but successful accounting firm that served longtime clients. When he met Alia 6 months earlier at a charity auction, his friends were relieved to see him smile again, until they noticed how quickly things progressed. Within 8 weeks, Robert proposed. The age gap drew gossip, but he was genuinely in love, convinced that Alia had given him reason to live again. She accepted with radiant enthusiasm, and though her family was absent from the ceremony, she assured everyone they couldn't travel from Kuala Lumpur. At the intimate wedding attended mostly by Robert's friends, the local reverend couldn't help but notice something unsettling. "I've married many couples," he later said, "and you can tell when one person looks at the other with devotion, and when someone looks at what devotion can buy." The ceremony was simple and elegant. Alia wore a custom gown Robert had paid for, and though her smile charmed the guests, her eyes revealed calculation. The reception took place in Robert's garden, under white tents adorned with imported lilies and jazz music floating in the background. Alia mingled gracefully, asking polite questions about legal procedures and family property. Robert's sister, Linda, later recalled, "She pulled me aside and asked about my brother's insurance and will on his wedding day. I knew something was wrong, but he was too happy to listen." To Robert, the evening felt like a dream. He was finally ready to start a new chapter, even talking about building a nursery and maybe having a child. For Alia, however, the marriage was only the final piece of a plan she had been crafting long before Robert ever slipped the ring on her finger. A plan that would use affection as a disguise for betrayal. Their honeymoon began the next morning. Robert had reserved a secluded mountain cabin 2 hours away, surrounded by pine forests and overlooking a peaceful lake. It was a place meant for love, but for Alia, it was a perfect stage for a crime. She had packed carefully dresses, jewelry, and 3 unmarked bottles of medication she had acquired through questionable means. For the first couple of days, Robert was blissful, preparing meals, lighting fires, and holding his wife close under the stars. Alia played her part with precision, smiling, laughing, and pretending affection while monitoring his every movement. On the 3rd night, Robert began to feel ill. He complained of nausea and fatigue. Alia offered him warm tea and digestive medicine, hiding the cold intent behind her gentle tone. By morning, his symptoms worsened. Alia continued administering what she called remedies, each dose slowly draining his strength. As his condition declined, panic started to replace her composure. He was deteriorating too quickly. This was not how the plan was supposed to unfold. When she called her secret accomplice, a voice she trusted on the other end of a hidden phone, the reply was sharp. "You're rushing it. Stop the medication. Make it look like an accident instead." The new plan was simple and cruel. Once Robert appeared to recover slightly, she would convince him to drive down the mountain road for medicine, ensuring he lost control on one of the dangerous curves. His death would look like a tragic accident, not a crime. Alia followed the instructions, allowing him to regain some strength. By Friday night, Robert was weak but conscious, thankful for her supposed care. When she suggested they leave early for town, he agreed without hesitation. That night, she woke him gently and said he had a fever and needed to see a doctor immediately. Still dizzy, Robert got dressed, trusting the woman he loved. As he reached for the car keys, Alia smiled softly, masking the dread in her heart. He would never make it down the mountain alive. At least that was what she believed. Alia Tan had held a driver's license for years and prided herself on her confident, precise driving. But tonight, she needed Robert Hayes to be the one behind the wheel. "I think I can manage," Robert said quietly, his hands trembling as he accepted the keys. Alia helped him outside, guiding him carefully into the driver's seat. Robert started the engine and adjusted the mirrors, his movements sluggish but steady. "You're coming, right?" he asked, looking at her through half-lidded eyes. "Of course," Alia replied with a reassuring smile. "I just need to grab my purse and lock up the cabin. I'll be right behind you." Instead of going inside, she stepped quickly into the shadows near the porch, her eyes fixed on Robert through the windshield. He sat waiting, the engine idling, his head leaning back against the seat in exhaustion. What he didn't realize was that while he had been asleep earlier, Alia had tampered with the car's braking system. Not enough to make it obvious, but enough to guarantee disaster. She had followed the instructions her secret accomplice texted her, loosening the pedal bolts and slightly cutting through the handbrake cable. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. When Robert finally honked weakly, confused by her delay, Alia rushed back to the car, pretending to be flustered. "Robert, the cabin door is stuck. I think I left the key inside. Please, go ahead to the hospital. You need a doctor right now. I'll lock up and follow you in a cab." "That doesn't make sense," Robert said weakly. "We could just break the lock." "No." Alia snapped, her tone suddenly sharp. "That place costs $1,500 a night. I'm not breaking anything. You're sick, and every minute counts. Please go, I'll catch up." Dizzy and disoriented, Robert finally nodded. "All right, but call me when you find the key." "I promise," she said softly, closing the passenger door and stepping back. He shifted the car into gear and began to drive down the winding dirt road toward the main highway. Alia watched the taillights vanish into the darkness of the forest, her heart racing, not with fear, but with anticipation. Based on her calculations, in about 12 minutes, he would reach the sharp curve at kilometer 15, the cliffside drop where the road dipped beside a 40-meter ravine. With weakened brakes and his fading consciousness, he had no chance of making the turn. Calmly, Alia went back inside, picked up her phone, and sent a short message to her accomplice. "Done." Seconds later, the reply came, "Wait 30 minutes. Then call emergency. Say he left for medicine and never came back." She brewed coffee, rehearsing her story. The frantic new wife, the tearful widow, the woman who had just lost the man she loved after a week of marriage. But at 12:47 a.m., her phone rang unexpectedly. "Hello," she answered. "Mrs. Hayes," a firm male voice asked. "This is Sheriff Morrison from Brooksville County. There's a man here claiming to be your husband, Robert Hayes. He seems confused and exhausted, but he's alive. Can you confirm his identity?" Alia froze, the blood draining from her face. "And my husband?" she stammered. "Yes, ma'am," the sheriff continued. "He mentioned something about brake failure and needing help. Can you come pick him up? He's at the station." Her hands shook violently as she hung up the phone. Robert was alive, and her plan had completely fallen apart. At 2:15 a.m., she pulled up outside the Brooksville Police Department, pale and trembling. Inside, Robert sat wrapped in a blanket while a paramedic checked his vitals. When he saw her, his eyes, once full of love, now carried only confusion and faint suspicion. "Thank God you're okay," Alia cried, forcing tears to her eyes. "Mrs. Hayes," said Sheriff Morrison, stepping closer. Your husband told us the brakes failed entirely. He only stopped the car by yanking the handbrake, nearly rolling it. He says the car was fine yesterday. Any idea what happened? I don't understand, Alia replied, masking her panic. It's a new car. That's impossible. We'll inspect it in the morning, the sheriff said evenly, watching her face carefully. Just routine procedure. On the silent drive back to town in a rental car, since the BMW was impounded, Robert said nothing. Alia tried to speak several times, but he just stared at the passing lights. Robert, are you angry with me? She asked quietly. I don't know, he said finally, but it's strange. I get violently sick. You insist I drive when I can barely stand, and then the brakes fail on a mountain road. Don't you think that's too many coincidences? I'm not suggesting anything, she began, pretending to sound hurt. I didn't say you were, he interrupted flatly. I'm just saying it's strange. The next few days were unbearable. Robert scheduled medical tests to uncover the cause of his sudden illness. Alia knew it was only a matter of time before the truth emerged. She had to act fast. That Wednesday night, she met secretly with her accomplice, Derek Martinez, an ex-con she'd once partnered with for scams, in an abandoned parking lot on the edge of town. You ruined everything, Derek hissed. The guy's alive, the cops are inspecting the car, and you probably left fingerprints everywhere. I can still fix this, Alia said urgently. He's scheduled for a medical procedure on Friday, under sedation. It's the perfect opportunity. You're insane, Derek muttered. You're going to kill him in the hospital? Not there, Alia whispered. Afterward, he'll be drowsy and weak. A pillow, during sleep, it'll look natural. Derek stared at her. You'd really do it? Kill him yourself, for money. Alia's lips curved into a cold smile. For $1.2 million, I'd do anything. Friday came. Robert underwent the procedure, and Alia listened intently as nurses explained how to care for him afterward. Keep him on his side, don't leave him alone, watch his breathing. She nodded dutifully, then ignored every word. At home, Robert was barely conscious. Alia helped him into bed, whispering soothing words while slipping extra sedatives into his water. By 3 a.m., his breathing was shallow, his pulse weak. She picked up a pillow, her hands trembling, not from guilt but adrenaline. As she stepped closer, Robert's eyes suddenly opened. I knew it, he rasped. Thomas warned me. So did Susan. The doctor called me earlier. My blood test showed high levels of sedatives. I pretended to swallow the pills tonight. I spit them out. Robert, please. I can explain. No, he said firmly. You can't. Suddenly, lights flashed on. From the closet stepped Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies, guns drawn. Behind them, Robert's relatives, Thomas Miller and Susan Hayes, appeared with recording equipment. It had all been a setup. Alia dropped the pillow and bolted, but officers tackled her instantly. As handcuffs clicked around her wrists, her composed mask shattered. You have the right to remain silent, the sheriff began. Alia ignored him, glaring at Robert. You fool. That money should have been mine. Robert looked at her with quiet sorrow. I loved you, he said, and you were going to kill me. Derek Martinez was arrested hours later. Evidence of the brake tampering instructions found on his phone. Alia was charged with attempted murder and conspiracy, but even in custody, she was not finished. 3 days after her arrest, her mother, Diane Tan, appeared at the station with a death certificate claiming Robert Hayes had died of heart complications. The document was signed by a doctor whose license had been revoked years earlier. My daughter may have her flaws, Diane declared, forcing tears, but she's not a murderer. The poor man's heart simply gave out. Sheriff Morrison stared at the forged document in silence. Alia might have been behind bars, but the game, it seemed, was far from over. The sheriff looked up from the papers and said coldly, Mrs. Tan, this document is fraudulent. Robert Hayes is very much alive. I spoke to him this morning. Diane Tan's voice trembled as she tried to hold her act together. No, you don't understand. He's dead. There's even a funeral scheduled tomorrow at Greenwood Cemetery. It was at that moment the true scale of Alia Tan's manipulation became clear. Even from behind bars, she had managed to pull the strings, using her phone privileges to contact her mother and Derek Martinez, her recently bailed-out accomplice, paid off by money from an unknown source. Alia had arranged an entire fake funeral. Her plan was reckless, but deviously simple. If the world believed Robert was dead, she could claim that the charges against her were baseless. After all, how could one be tried for attempted murder when the victim no longer existed? That way, the narrative would shift toward a tragic, natural death, and Alia would eventually reclaim Robert's life insurance payout. On Thursday morning, the sham ceremony took place at Greenwood Cemetery. A closed casket, dozens of attendees, most hired by Diane to make it look convincing. Even a corrupt preacher had been paid to lead the brief service. Today we say goodbye to Robert Hayes, the pastor announced solemnly. A man taken far too soon by fate. What no one realized was that several plainclothes investigators were among the crowd, recording every moment with hidden cameras. The coffin, stuffed only with sandbags, was lowered into the earth. Diane sobbed loudly, clutching the arms of relatives who truly believed her tears. But Alia had made a critical mistake. She had scheduled her bail hearing just 2 days later, confident that, with Robert dead, the attempted murder charge would collapse. Friday, 10 a.m. The courtroom in Ontario was filled to capacity. Reporters, spectators, and Robert's family. Alia entered in handcuffs but wore a faint, self-assured smile. "Your Honor," her lawyer began smoothly, "we request all charges against my client be dismissed. The alleged victim, Robert Hayes, passed away 3 days ago from heart complications. We have the official death certificate as evidence." "Objection," the prosecutor thundered. "The defense is attempting to deceive this court with falsified documents." "Fraud?" the defense attorney exclaimed dramatically. "There's a body buried, Your Honor. There are signed papers." Before the judge could respond, the courtroom doors swung open. Gasps echoed through the hall as Robert Hayes walked in, alive. Alia froze. Her face drained of color, then flushed red, then pale again. "Impossible," she whispered. Then louder. "Impossible. I saw you die." "You never saw me die," Robert said calmly, walking past the stunned crowd. "Because no matter how hard you tried, Alia, you never succeeded." The judge's gavel struck repeatedly as chaos erupted in the room. When order was finally restored, Judge Martha Williams fixed her sharp gaze on Alia. "Ms. Tan," she said icily, "not only did you attempt to murder your husband multiple times, but you had the audacity to falsify his death and attempt to deceive this court. This is contempt at its highest level." The prosecutor, James Davidson, presented a thick dossier of evidence: phone call recordings between Alia and Derek, pharmacy records of illegally obtained sedatives, a mechanic's report confirming deliberate brake tampering, and even footage from the night Robert pretended to be under sedation. "This," Davidson declared, "was a premeditated and cold-blooded attempt at murder driven purely by greed." Moments later, Derek Martinez was brought into the courtroom in shackles. Seeing no escape, he agreed to cooperate, confessing everything. "She planned it months before the wedding," Derek admitted. "She found a rich, lonely man. She told me to look up undetectable poisons and ways to rig a car's brakes. She said it was the perfect plan." Diane Tan was arrested outside the courtroom on charges of forgery, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Dr. Leonard Foster, who had signed the fake death certificate, was also indicted. 3 months later, Alia Tan's trial concluded swiftly. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned the verdict: guilty on all counts: attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and contempt of court. Judge Williams delivered the sentence firmly. "Alia Tan, you have shown no remorse, no conscience, and no humanity. I sentence you to 35 years in prison, without the possibility of parole for the first 25. Alia didn't cry. She didn't plead. She simply stared at Robert and hissed, "You weren't even worth half that money." Derek Martinez received 15 years for his involvement. Diane Tan was sentenced to 8 years. Dr. Foster's medical license was permanently revoked, and he was imprisoned for 5. 6 months later, Robert Hayes sat in his garden on a calm February afternoon, sipping tea with his sister, Susan, and his friend Thomas. "How are you really holding up?" Susan asked softly. Robert looked at the sky for a long moment before replying. "Betrayed," he said quietly, "but also grateful. Grateful to still be here, and for the people who saw through her lies when I couldn't." The divorce had been finalized swiftly. Alia didn't contest it. She couldn't. The life insurance policy was voided, and Robert donated the damaged BMW to a local crime museum as a reminder of how deceit can destroy lives. "Do you think you'll ever try again?" Thomas asked gently. "You know, love," Robert smiled faintly, "maybe someday. But next time, I'll trust my instincts and I'll do a background check first." The case of Alia Tan and Robert Hayes became known nationwide as the Impossible Funeral. It was remembered as one of the most daring yet disastrously executed fraud and murder plots of the decade, a haunting reminder of how greed can turn love into a deadly game.